Crazy.
It almost feels like we're being primed and prepped for some serious trauma in the future. And that's why one of the many reasons I really wanted you to come on board and give such detailed explanations about what it means to, have somebody commit cultural genocide or these really aggressive campaigns of removing a population from its home. I wanted you to speak to that so that, I feel that Americans kind of need to broaden a little bit, maybe understand that this could very well be our future. And we're starting to see little signs of it here and there.
And another example, of course, is in eastern Ukraine, right? The Donbass.
Right. We were just going to get there. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry to jump the gun.
No, that was a great transition.
Great transition. Thank you.
Well, I mean, because you're saying, like what you're saying about, people don't realize that this could come to you. And the people in the Donbass never saw this coming. I was there 2 years ago, and I went to the Donetsk. There's a bit of feedback, huh?
I think we're okay now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fire from Ukraine. Everything.
Yes. So I'm getting an echo.
Oh no.
Yeah, we had that earlier. It might have something to do with me sharing, but I don't know.
Is it better now?
Let me try speaking. No, I'm still getting. I'll just try to ignore myself.
Oh.
Okay. Mine went away. It might go away. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
A lot of audio issues today.
So in this article that you've shared, there's also a YouTube playlist that I put up, Donetsk People's Republic. I was there for, I forget now, just under 2 weeks, I think, around 2 weeks. And I went to a city called Gorlovka, which is north of Donetsk. And then I went to Frontline villages that are literally less than a kilometer, sometimes 500 meters away from the Ukrainian forces that are shelling them on a daily and nightly basis. So ostensibly there's a ceasefire, but the Israeli, well, they're kind of the same, aren't they? The Ukrainian forces are using prohibited artillery on these people who, from what I saw, were predominantly elderly people who have nowhere to go. Even if they could flee, they have nowhere to go and no means to exist. So they're staying in their homes that are being ravaged nightly. And even if their homes aren't fully destroyed, I saw houses that are have chunks of holes in the walls, and the people don't know they didn't know how they were going to survive the winter because they have no means of patching it up. But this one older woman I met in a village called Mine 67, she lives alone. Her husband died some years ago, and when I met her, she really reminded me of my mother for some reason. Just something about her, her strong will. But I just felt heartbroken when I met her because I thought, my God, I wouldn't want anyone to live like this. But now I feel like she's my mother, and here she is telling me she doesn't know how she's going to make it through the winter. And that's just to do with patching up her home and surviving the shelling and the heavy machine gun fire. In addition to the fact that she doesn't have an income, she probably has a pension. To access that pension, she would actually have to go into Ukraine. Right. So that's a whole story in itself that apparently takes quite a long time. And so, their lives are miserable. And she said there's these observers. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's OSCE. Right. And they're supposed to be neutral observers that are there to ensure both sides keep the ceasefire. But they go away. This is what I was told by a local journalist. They go away around 6 p.m. and that's when the really heavy shelling starts. And there's nobody. The reason they do it then is that there's nobody there to document it and to say it's happening, even though the residents are saying it's happening. They're filing complaints. So this is back to what you're saying about it could happen to your own people. I mean, these people, when I spoke with them, they said, look, we never foresaw our own country warring against us. We didn't want what happened in Maidan to happen to us. We didn't want what happened in Odessa. We didn't want these neo-Nazis to come to us. And also, the people in this region are ethnically Russian. and they wanted to be able to speak their own language, right? And Ukraine is increasingly, if not fully eradicated, Russian speaking from the areas they control. These people were aware of what could come to them, so they initially just wanted to be independent of that. And then, as time progressed and Ukraine was warring against them, they wanted their own republics. And so, the media portrayal, of course, is atrocious. If they even report on it, they'll say, the Russian invasion of Donbass and that Ukraine is fighting Russian soldiers, which is absolutely bonkers. Like, these are people, ironically, much as the white helmets are portrayed as former bakers and various civilian jobs, this is actually what these people are. They're just people who took up arms to defend themselves against these heavily armed Ukrainian neo-Nazi forces that are attacking them. Yeah. And just one other thing I wanted to mention, it's related, is Crimea, of course, because I know you're probably going to mention the British vessel that came towards Russian waters I think it sailed near Sevastopol, Crimea, right? And their pretext, and their pretext is that they don't recognize Crimea as being a part of Russia. But I did go there a couple of years ago, and I'm not saying like, okay, I said it, so it has to be true. But I'm just saying, in my experience, when I spoke with people there, again, they're ethnically Russian. They want to speak their language, and they said a lot of the people I met and spoke with, they said, well, it's not that Russia annexed us; it's that we returned to Russia. They specifically said returned, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Well, and again, it's coming back to what we were talking about, weaponizing identity, and in this case, using language as that pretext for using it as a weapon to and propaganda. And a means of selling the idea that these people are interlopers, and I've seen this before where they're talking about, well, they've only been here since such and such a date, and this is our land, and blah blah blah, and it was very interesting to hear or to read in your article. And by the way, what publication was that in, that article that we were showing?
That was on Mint Press News.
Mint Press News. Okay, yeah. We'll put up links in our show notes later. But I was reading that, and I noticed that language was a big issue on both sides, and also the idea that these forces from Ukraine were using Western armaments and bombs and rifles. They were U.S. Sniper rifles, and the militia. And what is it? Donbass?
Donbass is like the region, and it's the greater region. So you will find parts of the Donbass that are in Ukrainian-controlled territory, but then the two republics are the Donetsk People's Republic and the I think it's Luhansk People's Republic.
Okay, yeah. So the militia were saying we'll come across this after a skirmish, and these things are abandoned, and we know that these are weapons that are from the West. They're from the the EU and Poland and some. Yeah, so Poland is EU country. So it's amazing that and they were saying, it's like, why is Europe and why is the US and why is the West supporting neo-Nazis? I mean, these people actually are wearing swastikas.
Yeah, and they asked me, like, what do people back home think about the fact that the West is supporting Nazis? And I said, well, most people don't know, because of our media.
They don't.
No, and when there is coverage, it's very slanted. I mean, we were talking about NPR earlier when we were talking about Palestine, and this article that we were talking about with you before we went on the air, it was just just a fluff piece. And just address the very surface level of what was actually going on, and when I'd heard in the past, I haven't listened to NPR in a long time because I couldn't deal with it anymore. I couldn't. It was too hard picking out the real news out of the propaganda, and anytime you'd hear anything about that region, it would always be in the terms of like you said, the Russian fighters and the Russian army coming in and everything to do with Putin invading, and nothing to do, and maybe surface level coverage of like maybe there were some Nazi, sympathizers, and they, and that was it, And I also realized that this goes back to, the Orange Revolution back in, what was that, 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. I don't remember exactly.
Can you speak to the Orange Revolution? Did you want her to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I can't. I have to admit, I'm rather new to the issue of Donbass. So I basically, when I went there, it wasn't to then say like I know all about this region's history. It was because I realized that this was an issue that had fallen out of the media. And so what I actually had hoped when I went there, I'd hoped not to become the person that knows everything about there, but to make contacts there that I could then transmit, their reporting. So that, and also to hear for myself, what was happening. But all that to say, when the Orange Revolution was happening, I guess, I would have been politically still asleep at that point if it was 2004 or 5, because I didn't really start to wake up until that time, and it was with the issue of Palestine. So I don't actually know really. I mean, I have to imagine it had Soros' involvement, but I don't really know beyond that.
Yeah. I was doing some, background reading. I mean, it's been a while since I'd, read anything or heard anything about it, but I went back to it, and it looks like it was sort of the prelude for what's going on now. I mean, we're talking, 10, 15 years, and with the ouster of the president, they both had similar names, and I can never keep them straight. They both had the first name of Victor. And a Ukrainian name that I can't keep track of. They both started with, the last name started with V, so or Y. I mean, so their first name was Victor. Both names started with Y. Anyway, the president who, who was ousted before all this fighting that's taking place now that we're talking about. Resulted with him leaving Ukraine and going to Russia. And it was about him not wanting to join the EU in Ukraine. And this brought about what's happening now with the neo-Nazi regime that's in place. And these people who are considered Russian that are now fighting Ukraine. And again, thinking that even though they're Russian speakers, they think of themselves as Ukrainian, and it's their own country attacking them. That's just horrible.
Yeah, that's the part that's so strange about what's going on over there right now. What else did we want to talk about? You've blown us away with all of your information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been incredible. Do you have anything else you want to bring up?
Did you have any other follow-up about Ukraine and some of the experiences? I mean, you're not far from there now. Are you going back at all, or?
I definitely want to go back. I did inquire, and I had the okay from the Donbass side, but I think because of COVID, it's still, I think travel, when I inquired, it was back in March, I think. So because of COVID, travel, it was only for citizens of the region that could travel there. But I'm going to keep trying to go back there because and I would recommend, there's a British photojournalist who has been there, Dean O'Brien, and he's quite active on Twitter, and he closely follows events there. So he's on a daily basis tweeting either from a news source or from his sources that he met on the ground there, tweeting about both about the Ukrainian violations of the ceasefire, the use of heavy weaponry, and also about how people living in these areas can't afford to live, just like people have been forced into poverty that they did not deserve or request in Gaza and in Syria. He just posts things about volunteers taking food or clothing or etc. to these people in frontline areas that some of them are injured, some of them are just are living alone, have no one else, So he's a great source of information on things Donbass that I would recommend people follow. But yeah, I do want to go back there when I can.
And he's on the ground, as you say, so you're getting.
Well, he's not on the ground now. He's been there, but he's also trying to go back. But he's got good sources on the ground, and I haven't seen him put out any information that I wouldn't think is verifiable. not verifiable, whatever.
Yeah. You mentioned in your article that one of the officials you spoke to has a Telegram account both in Russian and in English now.
Yeah, that's the mayor of the city of Gorlevka. His last name is Pridko, I believe, and he was actually very, very helpful because it was my first time there, and people might not be aware, but like as with Syria, when you go to the Donbass, you have to take hard cash with you because of the sanctions. You can't use ATMs. So you have to come with the amount of money you think you'll need to cover accommodation, transportation, etc. Mm-hmm. And so I did take a certain amount of money with me, but I didn't really understand, like, would I be able to hire a taxi or could I use local transport? So he was actually super helpful in helping me organize things. I'm very grateful to him. He understood that my intent in going there was to try to bring more light to the suffering of the people there. So he was very helpful in giving me time to speak with me about the situation there, but also in helping me organize things. And then there was a remarkable woman, Irina, from a village called Zaitsevo, and she was like the head of administration of that village. And this is one of these villages that is right on the front line of being fired upon. And she's a very courageous woman. She was basically saying, like, their village hasn't seen peace since this all started. They haven't known ceasefire. And indeed, when I was going through the village and like the houses on the front line, most of them have been at least been shelled, if not been burned out by the shelling. So they can light a fire either by shelling or even by machine gun fire. Apparently, this is what I was told. If the machine gun fire, strikes whatever is able to strike a spark or whatever, and nobody's home to take care of the house, it can go up in flames. And when I was there, I saw a house that was still smoldering from, I think, a day or two prior, having been shelled. Anyway, this woman, Irina, she learned how to drive because she said there was nobody else going and covering and taking photos and videos and documenting what was happening. So she learned to drive. And then she started, as soon as she heard of some sort of shelling, driving there herself and documenting it. Very strong, courageous woman. And yeah, she just had a lot to say about, the horrors they've gone through. And she also, I asked her about the OSCE, and she said they've lodged countless complaints and been met, with relative silence. I mean, the OSCE will put out a statement, but not the kind of statement you would get from the UN if, say, Syria had actually used a chemical weapon against its people, right, which it didn't. The indignation that you get when it's the aggressor side, whether it's like the NATO countries or Israel, they get all the righteous indignation of the world and all the bodies that serve them. But then people who are being aggressed on a daily basis get nothing, even though they have documentation.
Pullquote is made possible by our patrons and supporters. You can help us continue to do the work that we do by becoming a patron at patreon.com/bookofhours. Join Rockfin or leave us a tip at rockfin.com/bookofhours. Or leave us a one-time donation at paypal.me/bookofhours. Thank you.